The best meal most black families ever shared was not served in a dining room. It came off a charcoal grate behind a baseball diamond wrapped in newspaper, and it cost less than a dime. Number 14 on this list fed entire families from a single pig foot. And the story behind number 7 forced people to eat a piece of fruit like it was an act of rebellion. These were not concession stands run by some corporation. These were grandmothers with cast iron skillets and men who built smokers from oil drums, feeding a neighborhood that had decided to build its own world because the other one locked the door. Hit subscribe because this history does not show up in textbooks. Here are 25 ballpark foods black families ate at Negro League games. Number 25, roasted peanuts. Before anything else, before the hot dogs and the barbecue and the cake, there were peanuts. Paper bags of them still warm, sold by boys who walked the bleachers, shouting prices nobody remembers anymore. The shells cracked between your teeth and fell under the bench and stayed there all summer. Every ballpark in America sold peanuts, but at a Negro League game, the kid selling them might have been the pitcher's nephew. The peanut vendor at a black ballpark was not hired by a corporation. He was from the neighborhood. He knew the regulars by name. The money he earned went home to his mother's kitchen table, not to some office downtown. That bag of peanuts was the price of admission to something much bigger than a baseball game. Number 24, roasted corn on the cob. Ears of corn, still in the husk, set directly on a charcoal grate until the outer leaves blackened and the kernels inside steamed, sweet and tender. Vendors peeled back the husk and used it as a handle, then rolled the cob in butter and salt. Corn was cheap. A farmer with a truck bed full of ears could sell every one before the 5th inning and still have enough left to bring home. The kernels popped between your teeth with a sweetness that came straight from the field, and the charred husk left a smoky taste on your fingertips that lasted the whole ride home. At a Negro League game, corn on the cob was the food that did not need a plate, a napkin, or a second thought. You held it with both hands and ate it end to end and tossed the cob under the bleachers where it joined the peanut shells already piling up from the first inning. Number 23, fried fish sandwiches. Somebody's mother had a cast iron skillet the size of a hubcap, and she set it over a burner near the parking lot on a folding table with a towel draped over the handle. Catfish, or whiting, dusted in cornmeal and salt, fried until the edges curled and turned golden brown. Served on white bread with hot sauce and nothing else. No lettuce, no tomato, no tartar sauce. The fish was the entire meal, and there was nothing else it needed. You could hear the oil popping from the third base side and follow the sound straight to the woman standing over the pan. She served them on squares of newspaper, and the grease soaked through before you finished. That sandwich cost almost nothing and tasted like the lake your uncle fished on Thursday mornings before work. Number 22, homemade lemonade, not from a powder, not from a can. Real lemons squeezed by hand into a glass jar with enough sugar to make your back teeth ache. Women brought it in gallon jugs packed in ice, and they poured it into paper cups for a few cents each. On a July afternoon in Memphis or Atlanta or Birmingham, that cup was worth more than the ticket. The ice melted fast and the lemonade got sweeter as the game went on, and nobody threw away the last sip. Some women added a sprig of mint. Some stirred in a splash of vanilla, but most of them made it the same way their mothers had, with nothing but lemons and sugar and cold water, because that was enough. Number 21, deviled eggs. Eggs boiled until the whites turned firm, then split open, and the golden center scooped into a bowl with mustard, a pinch of paprika, maybe a drop of pickle juice. Mixed smooth, pressed back into the hollowed whites, arranged in a covered dish, lined with a tea towel, and carried to the game like something precious. Deviled eggs showed up at every gathering where black families came together, from funerals to fish fries to Saturday doubleheaders. They traveled well, they did not need to be heated, and the woman who brought them always lined them up in the dish the same careful way, yolk side up, each one finished with a final shake of paprika that served no purpose except to let you know somebody took the time. At the ballpark, deviled eggs were the food you ate before the real food arrived, and somehow they were the thing you remembered longest after the game was over. Number 20, Cracker Jack. The same red, white, and blue box that showed up at every ballpark in the country. Caramel corn and peanuts, and a small prize inside that was never worth keeping, but always worth finding. Black children opened those boxes at Rickwood Field in Birmingham and at Blue Stadium in Kansas City, the same way white children opened them at stadiums across town. Cracker Jack did not care who was buying. It was the same caramel, the same peanuts, the same tiny tan prize at the bottom that never worked right. For 3 innings, that little box made a 10-year-old forget that the water fountain outside the park had a sign on it telling them where they could and could not drink. Inside the box, everything was equal. Number 19, barbecue ribs. Here's where the ballpark became something else entirely. Behind the bleachers, in the gravel lots, sometimes right on the sidewalk next to the stadium wall, men built fires in oil drums, cut in half and laid racks of pork ribs across the grate. The smoke was thick and sweet, and it mixed with the dust from the infield and the noise from the stands until the whole block smelled like a holiday nobody had named yet. These were not restaurant ribs. These were ribs cooked by a man who had been tending a fire since sunrise, turning the racks with a pair of pliers, basting with a sauce he mixed in a bucket and would not explain to anyone, not even his wife. The meat pulled from the bone in one clean strip if you held it right. The sauce stained your shirt and your fingers and the napkin you did not have because there were no napkins, just the hem of your undershirt or a handkerchief your mother told you to bring. People who came for the game stayed for the ribs. People who came for the ribs forgot there was a game. In Kansas City, where the Monarchs played, the barbecue culture around the stadium became so deeply rooted that it survived long after the team was gone. The pits outlasted the franchise. The sauce recipes outlasted the box scores. Entire barbecue traditions in Kansas City trace their roots to men who once sold rib plates in dirt lots behind baseball diamonds. The games are gone, but the barbecue never left. It just moved indoors, put up a sign, and kept cooking. The sauce is different now. The wood is different. But the smoke still smells the same, and the people who remember where it started can close their eyes on a warm Saturday and hear a stadium that is no longer there. Number 18, fried hand pies, half-moon pastries filled with stewed fruit, peach or apple or blackberry, folded shut by pressing a fork around the edge, and fried in a skillet of hot oil until the crust turned golden and the filling bubbled through the seal. Vendors sold them warm in squares of wax paper, and the juice from the fruit leaked through the crust and ran down your wrist before you took the second bite. A ham pie was not a slice of pie. It was a sealed pocket of filling you could eat while standing, walking, or watching a double play, and it never needed a plate or a fork. The women who made them started before sunrise, rolling out dough on a floured table, spooning and filling from a pot that had been simmering since the night before. Every batch came out slightly different depending on who made it, and that was the whole reason people returned to the same vendor week after week. Number 17, pie made from sweet potatoes, brought to the ballpark in a tin, sliced on a card table, sold by the wedge. The filling was dark orange and dense and spiced with nutmeg and cinnamon, baked low and slow until the top cracked just enough to let the steam out. The crust was the kind that somebody's grandmother rolled by hand because she did not trust store-bought dough, and never had. That pie at a ballpark was not dessert. It was a statement. It said that this gathering mattered enough to bake for. The women who carried those pies across town on a bus, holding them level on their laps the whole ride so the filling would not shift, understood. Something about occasion that no concession stand operating out of a window ever could. Number 16, snow cones, shaved ice packed into a paper cone and drenched in syrup so bright it looked like paint. Cherry, grape, orange, and a blue flavor nobody could name, but everybody wanted. The Iceman had a hand-crank machine or a block of ice and a metal scraper, and the line for his cart stretched past the outfield fence on the hottest days. Children stood there with dye running down their arms and dripping off their elbows and pooling in the creases of their palms, and nobody told them to wipe it off. A snow cone cost almost nothing. It melted faster than you could eat it, but for 5 minutes between innings, that paper cone full of colored ice was the coldest thing in the entire ballpark, and the child holding it felt rich. Number 15, hush puppies, cornmeal batter mixed with a diced onion and a pinch of salt dropped by the spoonful into hot oil and fried until the outside turned dark golden and the inside stayed soft and steaming. Served in a paper bag, 10 or 12 to a portion, eaten with your fingers one at a time between innings. Hush puppies came from the same vendor who sold the fried fish because the oil was already hot and the cornmeal was already out. You bought the fish and got the hush puppies alongside, and by the 4th inning, the bag was empty and your fingers were coated in cornmeal and grease, and you wiped them on your pants without thinking twice. A hush puppy was the simplest thing on the menu, just cornmeal and onion and hot fat, and somehow it was the first thing to sell out every Saturday. A Negro League ballpark on game day was not just a sporting event, it was the closest thing to a black Main Street that most cities had. Doctors sat next to janitors, teachers sat next to field hands. The banker's wife bought a rib plate from the same woman who sold fish to the bus driver. For a few hours on a Saturday, the neighborhood had its own economy, its own social calendar, and its own public square, all built around a baseball diamond and held together by the people who showed up. The food was the infrastructure. Every dollar spent on a plate of ribs or a cup of lemonade circulated inside the community before the sun went down. A woman sold enough hand pies to buy shoes for her children. A man with a smoker earned enough on a doubleheader weekend to pay the rent. When integration came and the Negro Leagues started losing their best players to the major leagues, the games thinned out, then the crowds, then the vendors, then the whole economy that had fed those families every weekend quietly folded up and disappeared without a single newspaper writing a word about what was actually lost. Number 14, pigfoot sandwiches. This is the one that tells you everything about who was sitting in those stands. A pig foot, slow cooked in a pot for hours until the cartilage dissolved and the meat fell apart into a soft, rich, gelatinous pile served on white bread with hot sauce or a splash of vinegar. It was messy, it was cheap, and it came from the part of the animal that the slaughterhouse practically gave away because the mainstream market did not want it. Black families had been cooking pig feet since the days of slavery, when the enslaved received the parts of the hog that the plantation house threw out: the ears, the feet, the tail, the snout. What was considered waste became a way of eating that fed entire communities for generations. By the time the Negro Leagues were drawing thousands of people every Saturday, pig feet were not a reminder of poverty. They were a badge of ingenuity. The women who sold pigfoot sandwiches outside Rickwood Field or along Vine Street in Kansas City understood exactly what they were offering. Not just food, proof that a people could take what was thrown away and turn it into something worth standing in line for. Most people born after 1980 have never been offered a pigfoot sandwich at a public gathering. The tradition did not transfer to the next generation of stadiums or vendors. It stayed behind with the women who carried it, and when those women stopped setting up their tables on Saturday mornings, the sandwich disappeared from public life. You can still find pig feet in southern kitchens, cooked slow in a family pot. But the sandwich, served on white bread to a stranger in a parking lot, sold for pocket change by a woman who knew your grandmother by name, belongs to a world that does not exist anymore. Number 13, sardines and crackers. A flat tin with a pull tab key that rolled back the lid in a tight coil, and a sleeve of saltine crackers wrapped in wax paper. You balanced the open tin on your knee and set one sardine across a cracker and ate it in 2 bites. The oil from the tin soaked into the crackers if you waited too long, so you ate them fast. Sardines and crackers were the food a working man brought when he came to the game straight from a shift and did not have time to stop at home. The tin fit in a jacket pocket. The crackers fit in the other one. For the price of a single barbecue plate, a man could buy enough sardines and crackers to last a whole doubleheader and still have change left for a bottle of soda. Number 12, pickled pig lips, sliced thin and cured in a jar of vinegar brine with red pepper flakes and a bay leaf, sold by the same vendor who had the pickled sausage and the penny candy. Pig lips were chewy and tangy and tasted like vinegar and smoke, and they came from the same tradition as every other part of the hog that the mainstream market discarded and black kitchens transformed. Most people under 50 have never seen a jar of pickled pig lips on a counter. But at corner stores and roadside stands and ballpark vendor tables across the South, they sat right next to the pickled eggs and the jawbreakers, and nobody thought twice about reaching into that jar. The lips were cheap because the hog's face was worth almost nothing to the people who owned the packing house. It was worth everything to the people who knew how to cure it. Number 11, moon pie and RC cola. 2 items sold separately but eaten together so consistently that they became a single unit. A moon pie was a round, marshmallow-filled cookie dipped in chocolate, bigger than your palm and twice as sweet. An RC Cola was a full-size bottle of soda that cost less than a Coca-Cola, which is why working families bought it. The combination became a meal across the South, black and white alike. At a ballpark, a moon pie and an RC was a full lunch for the price of a snack. The sweetness of the pie and the carbonated bite of the cola canceled each other out, and for 10 minutes, you forgot you were sitting on a wooden bench in the direct sun with no shade in sight. Number 10, pork chop sandwiches. A bone-in pork chop seasoned with salt and black pepper, fried hard in a cast iron pan until the edges crisped and the meat tightened around the bone, then set between 2 slices of white bread with a streak of yellow mustard. The bone stuck out past the edge of the bread, and you held it like a handle. Pork chop sandwiches were common at outdoor gatherings across the South, and at Negro League games they were sold from the same folding tables where the fish and the ribs came from. A chop was heavier than a hot dog and cheaper than a rib plate, and it filled you up for the rest of the afternoon. The bread soaked up the grease from the pan and turned soft and translucent where the meat sat, and you ate the whole thing in 4 bites and licked the mustard off your thumb. Number 9, big dill pickles. A whole dill pickle pulled dripping from a jar of brine and handed over in a square of wax paper. Sour and cold and loud enough to hear from 2 rows back when someone bit into it. Children ate them like popsicles, holding the pickle by one end and biting down the length of it until their lips puckered and their eyes watered. In the deep South, some vendors sold them with a peppermint stick jammed into the center, the sweetness of the candy mixing with the salt and acid of the brine into something that sounds wrong but worked perfectly. A dill pickle at a ball game was not a side dish. It was the snack that outlasted every inning and never got warm. Number 8, pralines, a disc of brown sugar and pecans cooked in a pot on the stove until the sugar caramelized and the pecans toasted, and the whole mixture was poured onto wax paper in rounds the size of a biscuit. Pralines were a Gulf Coast tradition, rooted in New Orleans and carried across the South by women who sold them from trays at markets, train stations, and ballparks. They crumbled when you bit them and the sugar dissolved on your tongue, and the pecans cracked between your teeth with a sweetness that was almost too much if you ate 2 in a row. At the ballpark, pralines were wrapped in squares of wax paper and sold for pennies, and the vendor who made them always sold out before the 7th inning because nothing else at the game tasted like brown sugar and butter and a kitchen that somebody loved. The food at these games was never really about the food. It was about what happened when a black community gathered in public on its own terms without asking anyone for permission. Every vendor table, every smoker on a trailer, every grandmother with a shoebox full of chicken and a dishcloth full of cornbread was an act of self-sufficiency inside a country that had not built a single public institution with black comfort in mind. The ballpark was one of the few places where black money moved in a closed circle. A man bought a plate from a woman, and that woman bought fabric from a black-owned dry goods store, and that store owner bought a ticket to next Saturday's doubleheader. The food was the engine that kept the circle turning. When Major League Baseball began integrating in the late 1940s, the Negro Leagues started losing their stars, then their crowds, then their vendors, then their reason to exist. The grandstands emptied one section at a time, the smokers went cold, and a food economy that had quietly sustained thousands of families every single weekend folded and vanished without anyone recording what it meant. Number 7, watermelon. No other food on this list carries as much weight. Watermelon was turned into a weapon against black Americans for over a century, drawn into racist postcards, used as a slur in newspapers, repeated as a punchline so many times that generations of black families stopped eating it in public altogether. The caricature was deliberate. After emancipation, formerly enslaved people grew and sold watermelons as one of their first acts of economic independence, and that success was punished with mockery so persistent it outlived the people who started it. But at a Negro League ballpark surrounded entirely by their own community, black families ate watermelon without apology and without looking over their shoulders. Thick wedges sliced off the back of a truck, cold from sitting in a wash tub full of ice water all morning, the juice running down your chin and dripping onto your good shirt. It was a fruit, just a fruit, sweet, cold, and perfect for a hot afternoon in a stadium with no shade. The fact that eating a slice of watermelon in public required courage tells you everything you need to know about the country these games were played in. At the ballpark, nobody flinched. Nobody lowered their voice. The watermelon was as free as the laughter around it, and both existed because the people in those stands had decided that shame was something they would leave outside the gate. Today, watermelon is still one of the most popular fruits in the country, but the image has never fully recovered. And the fact that it took a segregated ballpark to create a space where black families could eat a piece of fruit in peace says more about this country than any history book is willing to print. Number 6, sauce, hoghead cheese, made from the head of a pig, boiled for hours until every scrap of meat fell from the skull and the natural gelatin in the bones set the whole thing into a cold, firm, sliceable loaf. Served on crackers or on a piece of bread, it looked strange and unsettling to anyone who had not grown up watching it being made in a kitchen pot big enough to sit in. But for families who had been making sauce for generations, stretching one hog head into a week of meals, It was a delicacy, cold, tangy, flecked with bits of meat and seasoned with vinegar and black pepper. At the ballpark, sauce was the food that separated the old guard from the young. The elders bought it without hesitation. The children stared at it and asked questions nobody answered. Number 5, candy apples. A whole apple dipped in red sugar syrup that hardened into a shell so shiny you could see your reflection in it, jammed onto a wooden stick and sold for a few cents near the entrance. Children carried them around the stadium like trophies, holding them up so the light caught the glaze. The candy cracked when you bit through it, and underneath was a tart apple that fought back against all that sweetness with a sourness that made your jaw tighten. Candy apples were not soul food. They were carnival food, county fair food, something borrowed from the wider American tradition and folded into the afternoon. Every outdoor gathering in the South had a candy apple vendor, and the Negro League games were no different. Number 4, strawberry knee-high. Not Coca-Cola, not Pepsi. A bottle of bright pink strawberry soda with a flavor so artificial and so sweet it made your eyes water and nobody cared. Knee-high was the soda of choice in black neighborhoods across the South for decades, cheaper than the big national brands and stocked in every corner store from Alabama to East Texas. Vendors at the ballpark kept the bottles standing upright in wash tubs full of ice, and the glass was so cold it fogged the moment you pulled it out. You held that bottle between your knees when you needed to clap, and you nursed it for 3 innings because once it was gone, the sun came back. When you finished, you brought the bottle back to the vendor for the deposit. A return bottle was worth a penny, and a penny counted. Number 3, banana pudding. Vanilla wafers layered with sliced bananas and a custard made from eggs and milk and sugar, cooked on the stovetop and poured warm over the cookies until they softened into the pudding and became part of the texture. Topped with meringue or left plain, depending on who made it. Banana pudding came to the ballpark in a covered casserole dish and was served with a large spoon into paper cups or onto squares of wax paper. It was the dessert that could not be replicated by a store or a vendor with a cart. It required a stove, a pot, patience, and a hand that had made it enough times to know exactly when the custard was thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. The woman who brought banana pudding to the ballpark was announcing something without saying a word. This game mattered enough to cook for. Number 2, sweet tea, brewed strong in a pot on the stove, sweetened while the water was still boiling, so the sugar dissolved completely into the liquid, then cooled and poured over ice until the jar sweated through the towel wrapped around it. Sweet tea was not ordered at a Negro League game. It was brought from home in a gallon jug, sometimes 2, packed into a cooler or carried by hand with both arms, poured into paper cups and shared with whoever happened to be sitting nearby. You did not need to know someone's name to pour them a cup of sweet tea. You just needed to see them sitting in the sun looking like they could use one. Sweet tea at the ballpark was hospitality made portable. Every family that brought a jug brought enough for people they had never met. Number 1, red drink. Nobody called it by its brand name. It was always just a red drink. A pitcher of fruit punch mixed from a powder, dyed the color of a fire truck, sweetened until a single cup could make your whole mouth ache. Every black gathering in the South had it. Church picnics, family reunions, funerals, cookouts, and every single Negro League game where a woman set up a table near the bleachers. The red drink was not special. That was what made it important. It cost almost nothing to make. It required no recipe. It was always there, and you never had to ask whose it was because it belonged to everybody. A child who grew up going to Negro League games may not remember who pitched or who won, but that child remembers the color of the drink in the paper cup and the taste of it and the fact that someone made enough for the whole section without being asked and without keeping count. The food at these games was never really about nourishment. It was proof that a people who had been shut out of every public square in the country could build one of their own with a charcoal grill, a folding table, and a pitcher of something red that never ran dry. Number 29, syrup sandwich. 2 slices of white bread and a thick pour of cane syrup folded together and pressed flat enough to eat without dripping. There was no peanut butter involved, no jelly, no butter on the bread if the house was running short. Just bread and syrup. Children carried them to school wrapped in wax paper, and nobody in the lunchroom who had not grown up eating one understood why anyone would. It was the kind of meal that existed because the pantry had 2 things in it that morning, and the person making lunch did not waste time wishing for a third. The syrup soaked into the bread and turned it dense and sweet and heavy in the hand. Outside of Black and rural Southern homes, a syrup sandwich was not a meal. Inside them, it was breakfast, lunch, and the thing you handed a child who said they were still hungry after supper. Number 22, watermelon rind pickles. After the red flesh was eaten, the rind got peeled, cubed, and soaked overnight in lime water to firm it up. Then it was simmered in a syrup of sugar, vinegar, cinnamon sticks, and whole cloves until the cubes turned translucent and sweet enough to eat like candy. A jar of watermelon rind pickles sat on the relish tray at summer functions next to the bread and butter pickles and the olives. Making them took 2 days and a willingness to save what most people threw away. The jars lined the pantry shelf like stained glass, and the women who made them traded recipes at church the way other people traded gossip. When watermelon became something you bought pre-cut in a plastic container, the rind never made it home. The sweetest part of the fruit was the part everyone learned to throw away. Number 26, pepper sauce, a glass bottle, usually an old vinegar bottle or a cleaned out hot sauce bottle, stuffed full of small hot peppers from the garden and topped off with white vinegar. It sat on the table at every meal right next to the salt. Alyamut shook it over greens, beans, peas, rice, cornbread, and anything else that needed heat. The peppers steeped in the vinegar for weeks, and the longer the bottle sat, the hotter and more complex the liquid got. When the vinegar ran low, you just poured more on top of the same peppers. Nobody bought hot sauce when the pepper plants were producing. The bottle had no label, no brand, and no recipe. Every family's tasted different, and guests who tried it for the first time learned quickly that a light shake was enough. That bottle outlasted everything else on the table, and nobody ever threw it away. Number 23, congealed salad. Every church supper in the 1970s had at least one Jell-O mold sitting on the dessert table, except it was not a dessert, it was a salad. Lime gelatin mixed with crushed pineapple, cream cheese, and chopped pecans, poured into a ring mold and chilled until firm. Some versions used orange gelatin with shredded carrots. Others went with cherry and cottage cheese. The mold was the point. It arrived at the table looking like a crown, jiggling on a glass plate, and everyone knew exactly who brought it because the same woman brought it every single time. Younger generations killed it, not with criticism, just with silence. They stopped eating it, stopped requesting it, and eventually the woman who made it stopped bringing it. The ring mold went into the cabinet next to the good china, and both collected the same dust. Number 27, chicken feet, bright yellow, scaled, with the toenails still attached when they came out of the market bag. Most of America would not have touched them. In a black kitchen, chicken feet got cleaned, the outer skin peeled off. After a quick scald in boiling water, then dropped into a pot and simmered for hours until the tendons dissolved and the broth turned thick and gelatinous. Some families ate them straight from the pot, pulling the soft cartilage off each tiny bone with their teeth. Others stewed them with tomatoes and onions or pickled them in vinegar and hot pepper. The feet cost almost nothing because nobody else wanted them. That was the whole economy of a black kitchen in the 1960s, taking what the rest of the country refused and turning it into something the family asked for by name. Number 19, crackling bread. When a hog was rendered for lard, the crisp bits of skin and fat left behind were the cracklings. They got folded into cornbread batter and baked in a hot cast iron skillet until the bread came out golden, dense, and studded with pockets of salty crunch. Crackling bread required fresh cracklings, which required a family that still rendered its own lard, which required a family that still bought a whole hog or raised one. Each step back revealed another step that modern life had already erased. At a function, a pan of crackling bread sat next to the greens and the beans, and it disappeared faster than the plain cornbread sitting beside it. The crunch told you a family still lived close to the source. When families stopped rendering lard at home, the cracklings vanished from the batter and the bread went quiet. Number 25, butter beans, large, flat, pale green lima beans cooked in a pot with a piece of salt pork or a ham bone until they turned soft enough to mash against the roof of your mouth with your tongue. The potlikker thickened as they cooked, turning creamy and starchy without anyone adding a thing. Served over rice or alongside cornbread, a pot of butter beans was a full meal that cost next to nothing and stretched across the week. Most of America knew lima beans as a frozen vegetable nobody wanted on their plate. In black kitchens across the South, butter beans were not the same food. They were slow cooked, deeply seasoned, and eaten with the kind of quiet satisfaction that came from a pot that had been left alone long enough to do its own work. Number 24, ham salad sandwiches. A baked ham left over from Sunday dinner, fed through a hand-crank meat grinder, bolted to the kitchen table. The ground meat was mixed with mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, a boiled egg chopped fine, and a spoon of yellow mustard. It went onto soft white bread, cut into triangles, and stacked on a plate under a sheet of waxed paper. Ham salad stretched one leftover roast into enough sandwiches to feed a card table full of guests. The grinder did the work, and the sound of it turning was as familiar in a black kitchen as the hum of the refrigerator. Children stood next to the table and watched the pink curls come out the other end, waiting to scrape the plate. When the grinder disappeared from the kitchen and the deli counter started selling sliced ham by the pound, the salad lost its starting point. Nobody ground ham by choice when they could buy it sliced. Number 30, smothered cabbage. A whole head of green cabbage cut into thick wedges, laid into a deep skillet with bacon drippings, onion, salt, and just enough water to keep it from scorching. The lid went on tight and the heat dropped low, and the cabbage cooked down slowly until every piece turned soft and translucent and soaked through with pork fat and onion. There was no crunch left in it. That was the point. Smothered cabbage was not a side dish that looked pretty on a plate. It was the kind of food that filled the kitchen with steam and fed everyone at the table for the cost of one vegetable and a piece of leftover bacon. Most of America ate cabbage raw in a slaw or boiled it until it fell apart. In a black kitchen, smothering it low and slow turned it into something else entirely. Number 25, cheese straws. Sharp cheddar, grated fine, mixed with butter, flour, a shake of cayenne, and pressed through a cookie press or piped by hand onto a baking sheet. They came out thin, ridged, crisp, and salty enough to make you reach for a second handful before you finish the first. At a function, Cheese straws sat in a tin near the front of the table, and the woman who brought them never wrote down what she put in the dough. The ratio of cheese to cayenne was personal. Some batches burned the back of your throat, others barely whispered. The press itself was usually older than the woman using it. When store-bought cheese crackers became the norm, the tin stopped showing up. The press went into a drawer and stayed there. Number 24, pigtails, stubby, bony, mostly gristle and fat, sold in bundles at the butcher counter for almost nothing because the only people buying them already knew what to do with them. In a black kitchen, pigtails got simmered in a pot of beans or greens for hours, the collagen slowly breaking down into the broth and giving the whole pot a richness that no amount of seasoning alone could match. You did not eat around the pigtail. You gnawed on it, pulled the small bits of meat and softened cartilage off each vertebra, and left a clean pile of tiny bones on the side of the plate. The flavor was deep, porky, and concentrated in a way that came only from the parts of the animal that had worked the hardest. Nobody outside these kitchens even knew the butcher sold them. Number 20, sweet potato pone, not a pie. A dense, spiced pudding made from raw grated sweet potato, eggs, sugar, butter, milk, and nutmeg, baked in a cast iron skillet until the top cracked and caramelized and the center stayed soft and custard-like. The grating was the labor, raw sweet potato on a box grater by hand until the bowl held enough pulp for a full skillet. Sweet potato pone was older than sweet potato pie and heavier. It sat on the dessert table and drew the people who grew up eating it because nothing in a bakery case looked or tasted anything like it. When food processors replaced the box grater, nobody used them for this. They just stopped making it. The skillet-shaped crust on top was the signature, and it only formed when raw grated potato hit hot iron. No shortcut reproduced it. Number 28, fried corn. Not corn on the cob, and not canned corn heated in a pot. Fried corn started with fresh ears, the kernels cut straight off the cob with a sharp knife, then scraped hard with the back of the blade to get all the milk and starch out of what was left. That milky pulp went into a hot skillet with bacon grease, salt, pepper, and sometimes a spoonful of sugar, and it cooked down into something thick, creamy, and nothing like any corn dish most of America ever saw on a plate. It clung to the spoon. It browned on the bottom of the skillet if you let it sit long enough. And the smell of it frying was the smell of late summer in every kitchen that had a garden or knew somebody who did. Number 21, caramel cake, a yellow layer, cake covered in a cooked caramel icing that required standing over the stove with a wooden spoon, stirring sugar and butter until it reached the exact shade of amber that separated a good caramel cake from a burned one. The icing had to be poured and spread fast before it hardened, and if you waited 10 seconds too long, the whole batch seized into a grainy mess. Caramel cake was a test of nerve. The women who made it well were known for it across the church. The ones who brought it to a function carried it like a trophy. Younger bakers avoided it because the icing punished anyone who looked away from the pot. Box mix frosting replaced it, and the difference was obvious to anyone who remembered the real thing. Rickwood Field still stands in Birmingham, but the vendor tables vanished decades ago. The folding chairs, the oil drum smokers, the gallon jugs of sweet tea packed in ice, all of it folded up when the crowds thinned and never came back. But the recipes survived because the women who carried them never needed the stadium to keep cooking. Make one of these this weekend. Fry a catfish on white bread. Mix a pitcher of red drink. Take a dish of banana pudding to somebody who did not ask for it. Drop the one your family brought to the game in the comments. Ahas.